Hi guys, I've got a nice little video here about game optimizations, particularly with coding. I found a nice little solution to a problem that I realized that a lot of the stuff in CopperCube, when you get the current node of something, you've got to run something on each individual object. Now if you've got like 100 objects in a scene, so for example a game where you're picking up a lot of loot and interacting with switches and doors and all sorts of stuff and storage containers, you might have like over 100 items, and by default the way I've done it to start with, which I realise is not the best way to do it, which is the default CopperCube way, you have your proximity box for entering and exiting the radius to change a variable so that you can then interact with something when you're at a certain distance, within a certain distance, and then when your cursor goes over it, it finds the current item. That's why I've done it, because that's a little extension I made myself just to pick up the current item, which is the item that you're looking at attached to, and then it will run JavaScript to hide and unhide the cursor to show that it's being highlighted. But that had to be attached to each and every single item. Now I've only got a certain, under this loot list of stuff, there's only probably like 25 different items, but that's just the base items, and all the stuff in the game will be spawned off these copies of these items, which all these items are underground, just a little storage item underground there. So in other words, yeah, I could have easily at least 50 to 100 loot items. Then you've got all the switches and doors to interact with, and the storage things that I've got that you open up and store items in. I mean, that could be, each of those would generally have to have all these four things here, or at least these. So 2 proximity checks and a on cursor highlight. So on enter and on enter mouse and on leave mouse. So all these things are running all the time. All these individual behaviors. It would use up a lot of CPU power necessarily. Because when in fact the best way to do it is have it not come from each individual object, but come from the player, because the whole thing revolves around the player, obviously. So you really should only need to run it once from the player, looking out and just picking up the current node under the mouse, whatever that is, and then do the checks, whatever you need to do there. So you could theoretically reduce it to pretty much like one behavior instead of like 300 different behaviors running all the time. I mean, that's just not very efficient at all. So I've found a better way just recently. Been playing with something. I'll be changing my game just to fix up the code soon, but I'll show you some code that I've picked up on that it's a lot better. This is just a little test environment. So what I've done was, just instead of having every object to show what the current node is being attached to, something being attached to each object, I've instead just attached it to the player. Now to pick up the current node underneath the mouse position, that's not straightforward or so easy. So I haven't found an easy way to do that, but I found an alternative method. So basically anything I want to interact with, I've just got a little folder here called interact, and I just dump everything in there, whether it'll be like a door switch or a lootable pickup item or a storage item that's to open a door or something like this, open a database type thing and store items in. Depending on the name of it will be how I deal with it. But basically all I've got to do is just set up a folder and drop anything I want to interact with into that folder. And what it does, does it in 2 stages. So first I need to get a list of all the, instead of if I had like 100 objects, interactable objects, I don't really want to be doing a for loop over every single one of them on a regular basis, like, you know, like every 50 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, constantly doing that. I mean, you could, but that's not very efficient. So in other words, I want to reduce the amount of CPU power it's running all the time. So in other words, I really only want to check if the mouse cursor is highlighted over any objects in the local vicinity of the player, because my maps are going to be pretty big and they're going to be stuff scattered everywhere. So I only need to be checking the stuff in close proximity. So that's what I've done. So I've broken it into 2 parts basically. So this one runs every 2,000 milliseconds, but eventually we'll have it attached to the the walk extension that plays different sounds when you're walking. So basically I'll do a count. So every 10 steps it'll then run this this little bit of code. So in other words, if you're not moving around much, you won't need to run. as they all say, the best code is the code that you don't have to run. That's the best type of coding you can do. So in other words, just run it when you need it. That's the best way to go, rather than constantly running things over and over and over unnecessarily. You run it when you need it. So this will later on be incorporated into the walk sounds extension. So you just do 10 steps, then you run this bit of code, and then reset back to 0 and go from there. So basically what it does is it just looks at all the local objects in the... I'll come back to this and explain it a bit later. It just picks up the within 80 looks at all the objects in close proximity to the player within 80 units. It'll then create an array, put all those items in an array, and those are the only items that will be for looped over in your regular check to see whether you are actually highlighting the item to whether it's interacted or not. So it's a very general thing that runs infrequently, so it doesn't really have a big impact on anything. Whereas this one that runs a bit more often, 200 milliseconds, that's not too bad by itself. It's not that often, but I don't really want to be running over every single item that's interactable every 200 milliseconds. You know, I could, but it's just not that that efficient either. So it's better to break it into two parts that way, I feel. And so I'm only doing a for loop to see if I'm highlighting one object in front of me of the local objects only. And yeah, so what it does is it just does line collide with bounding box of C node. It uses that type of thing to see whether you shoot a line from the player to directly in front of you using its the player's target. Actually, I could have used the mouse X, mouse Y, find 3D position from 2D. That effectively does exactly the same thing as the player target. So I've already got the target, which automatically updates anyway. So I just use that. It's a bit cleaner. Yeah, and all it does is after that, so I've got the general list of things, but then I want to look, so if it's directly in front of the player, and also if the length away from the player is within 22 units. I've just used 22, that seems to work out pretty right how I want in my game. Everyone's game would be different, but 22 seems roughly around pretty good, what I want. Then all it does is highlight the cursor, or turn it on and off accordingly. I'll just show you that. Just check the, yep, full screen. Alright, so here's a list of objects. In the wording box up the top, it's to give me the current node, and it says items 1 in the little information box on the top right. What it's saying is I can only find one object within 80 units. If I move around, it'll change it, so there's one there, and there'll be that one and those two together. And if I move sort of in the middle of those two, it should pick up all three. There we go, items 3. So it's looking at those 3 items. So it's only going to up, it's pointless to be checking all the other items in the whole screen. You just look at the ones in the close vicinity. And of those lists, it'll only update the cursor if it's within certain distance. So right there you go. See, it says box, turn it forward, back. So that's the box. There's the sphere, and there's the cone mesh. So it's all working fine, picking up the current node. It's just the name of the node, it's what it's picking up, and that's what I need. So this box, it's working fine. So that distance, yep, that's pretty good. And as you can see, it actually runs pretty accurately. So just there you go. Highlights the cursor red when it's just starting to interact with the object. You go across and turns off. So it's actually very, very accurate. Quite happy with that. Turns on, turns off. See, beautiful. So it works really well. So yeah, it turns on reasonably quick. If I want to run it every 100 milliseconds, it'll just run a bit quicker. But I don't think I need it. Less is more. That's fast enough, and that runs consistently well without an issue. And I'm really happy about that. Now you do have to position the cursor in the middle correctly. I'll just quickly show you that. Otherwise, it won't actually line up how you want. Now, so you got so there's the red one and the white one. Now, so this cursor, notice how the cursor has a box around it. That box is 2 wide and 4 height in percentage. So in other words, the cursor is in the direct middle of that box. So therefore, if you want the direct center of the screen, you take 50 and you minus half the amount of each one. So 50 minus 1, so 49, so that's 49 there. and this is 48 as it's half of the 4, so from the height. So that's how you get the exact middle of the screen, and that way it'll work properly. Now just going into the code, so see how my interact folder, just anything I drop in there will then straight away be part of the check to see if anything is close enough to interact with, basically. So you don't need any behaviors in any of those, which is good. At most, I might use collide when moved using gravity, but that would be the only thing I would keep. So I'll be changing my game quite a bit because this is a way better way to do it. So in other words, there's the initial filter. It's a large filter just to get the local objects only. I'll be putting this on the forum, this whole CCB file, so you can use the whole thing actually. Yeah, so it's saying, okay, there's the folder interact. So it creates an array, an empty array each time, so it's only updating, every time it updates, it's only showing the current place positions each time. Get the list, number of child nodes, get the player position, yeah, create a function. You have to use a function if you're going to be using this type of thing, subtract, to determine the distance between the object and the player. Otherwise it doesn't want to work. There's other methods you can do to pick up the distance as well without running a function, but I don't see any problem with that. It just runs it here. It's not a problem. There's the for loop. The counter just goes through the number of here. More stuff you put in there, it'll just automatically update. It's not a problem. It's very simple. Yeah, so find the position, get the distance between the object and the play if it's within 80, then update, get the name of the item, property node, and just add that to the array. I've called the array ARR interact. That's just I've called it that for starters. Call it whatever you want. So it just pushes and adds it to the a brand new blank array. So each and every time it's just showing the items within a certain distance from the player. So I mean, so if I connect that to the walk function, it'll only need to run when it absolutely needs to. So that'll be even more efficient. So yeah, that'll be good. Now this one here runs every 200 milliseconds. That's about right. If you want maybe 100 milliseconds, that's slightly faster, but you don't really need it. Yeah, so all this does is effectively the same thing. It does a for loop over the number of items in the new array you've set up, between 1 and 3 items, whatever it is. Gets the position, gets the end position I've used is the target of the player. So the starting position for this does the line collide with bounding box. It shoots a line out. It just simply goes from the player using its target. So it's pretty straightforward actually. So there's the start, and there's the end point, the player target. So yeah, it actually works pretty good. You can't actually manually reduce the. You know how you can change the target from the player. You can actually do that, but that doesn't change its actual effect on the code for some reason. I thought maybe it would, and you could actually do the distance check using just simply that, but it doesn't actually work that way. So in other words, we just run our own distance check. So I want a more accurate distance check than the general one, and all this does is there you go. So if it interacts with the bounding box and is less than 22 units, then set the CopperCube variable current, which is just the name of the variable I've got to show the current node each time, and update the cursor, make it visible, the pink one, and then I'm stopping it. I don't want to run it anymore because the first time it finds an object in front of you within certain distance, it stops there because theoretically there could be an object behind it. It may keep running and might actually pick up 2 objects. I'm not sure about that, so I don't want it to do that. And if it can't run, if it's not within distance or in the line of sight, then it just says the current node is nothing, and the cursor, pink cursor highlight is off, and that just runs the function. Yeah, so it works pretty good. Pretty happy with it actually. Should save a lot of unnecessary performance loss using the traditional method of attaching something to show the current node on every single object, which is, yeah, it's so inefficient. Whereas this way is far superior. I'll be interested to try and calculate the performance gain by doing it this way. But anyway, it should be good. So yeah, I'll post this online. So hope it helps. Hope you enjoy that. Cheers.